Kane, the AFL yesterday revealed its latest suite of rule amendments for season 2026 after Monday's commission meeting in Perth. There's one brand new rule. There's changes to an existing 6. We knew a lot of this was coming, and it follows the changes that were ratified in September that saw the scrapping of the centre bounce and the scrapping of the sub rule, 5 on the bench, of course, for next year. So something like 9 alterations, all things told, in the end. What's your overwhelming thoughts in regards to the changes announced yesterday?
Well, some of them were needed. We've been complaining about just for instance, the ruck nominations set up around the ground for a long, long time. So I think that is a positive move. It was farcical to think that an umpire would delay throwing the ball up until he had 2 clear nominees as to who was going to ruck. So I think that is good. I've got no issue with the kick-in time being shortened, more in line with how long players get around the ground. So I don't think we'll notice much of that other than a few play-on calls from the umpire. The new centre bounce situation where the rucks can't cross the line is great, and we'll speak to Jeff White about that. We'll see the rucks be able to jump and contest the footy, and it will be more advantageous to the leaping, more athletic ruckmen, more so than the wrestlers like Brodie Grundy and Tristan Sherry. So I really like that. But then there's some confusion. I think the crackdown on players shrugging, and that will now be seen as prior opportunity, more in line with how a fend-off is seen, is really difficult to adjudicate. We've seen that already. Like, umpires don't know whether to pay a free kick or play on for players that just slightly lower their centre of gravity or shrug. And why aren't you allowed to shrug? Why can't you shrug a tackle off? So I'm not sure that should be prior. I think that's going to be really confusing. And then the stand crackdown as well is going to be an absolute nightmare.
Yeah. So let's run through them all. Just before we do, this was Greg Swan on the new rules and the announcement yesterday.
The quarters ended up going out to, on average over 35. We just we think that's too long. Most of these aren't a big stretch on what already happens. One of the advantages of doing it now is that they all get back for pre-season later this month. And, we have our umpire visits and we'll be able to practice things.
So that was Greg Swan yesterday. Now, you touched on this earlier. All these changes are of a mind to cut the dead time within games. And the league's estimating that these rules or rule amendments will cut something like 3 minutes of game time. They're obsessed with shortening the match time from siren to siren. So not shortening the quarters, but cutting out the dead time, which, Greg Swan put on the agenda on his very first day in the job. So they're spouting here in individual changes. This will save 20 seconds. This might save 31 seconds. So that's where the motivation comes from. I'm with you on the shrugging rule. The examples that were provided. Now, this is what the AFL have said in the shrugging. A shrug and a tackle will now be deemed prior. It will be similar to how a fend or an attempt to evade a tackle is deemed prior opportunity. It is hoped that this will stop players from contributing to a high tackle, which the league clearly hate, while making the rule easier to adjudicate for umpires. I'm with you. I struggle to see how it makes it easier. It's infinitely harder because it's another layer to contend with as a decision maker, as a whistleblower. But in the examples given from Jack Higgins, so you're allowed to fend and you're allowed to shrug, Kane. So you are allowed to do it, but the league's saying if you do it and you don't break the tackle, then you are gone. So that sounds good in theory, but it is so hard because a lot of these shrugs the players are doing it to bring the tackle up high. So is the initial tackle high? Is the initial tackle on the point of the shoulder? Is he shrugging it? Has he had prior initially? It's another layer for the whistleblower to contend with in his or her decision making, and all in a split second. It's going to be very difficult.
Couldn't agree more. Who's pushing? Is our man Coxie in there this morning?
Yep.
Yeah, well, he needs to find me the volcano sound effect if he can, and I'll give him some time to do that.
Oh, no time required.
He doesn't need the time. Look at that. That's how good he is. My overriding thought on this is that most of these rule changes are as a result of the AFL already changing the rules. So when you work your way through it, the stand situation where a player must stand if they're in the protected area within 5 metres when a mark or free kick occurs is a rule change off the back of another rule change. So they got the first rule change wrong. They have to adjust the rule again and fix that. The insufficient intent rule has now led to last disposal out of bounds. So they've gone, okay, we need to go one step. We've got to change the rule again because we changed the adjudication of the rule. The ruck rule at the centre bounce, we've got to change that because we changed the rule to allow the rucks to cross the line. The ruck nominations rule is changed now because we changed the rule that said you had to nominate rucks. When you change rules, it leads to problems, and this has led to another 7 rule changes, largely in reaction to rules that they have already changed. So just because they've made 7 rule changes doesn't mean this is going to be the last of it. There's going to be problems with this. Your point about the shrugging, I bet you there's problems with that. The kick-in rule, they've shortened the time because they changed the kick-in rule. All of these rules are rule changes off the back of rule changes, which happens when you change the rule so often.
Now, I agree with all of those points except for Stan. When Stan came in, you couldn't even blink, remember? And it was a 50. Now, that was ridiculous. But it did start off strict, and they've allowed it to lax over time.
No,
they've allowed this outside 5.
You could get out of 5.
That came later, I reckon. You remember the hands and everything? You couldn't even... You got a bit of wind blew you over a little bit and it was 50. Like, you couldn't even blink and it was 50. So it started off too hot. Then they let it lax too much. So this is just a tightening. The rule's not changing. It's just a tightening in the interpretation. Shrugging, ruck, I'm with you on all of those. And who does it spell trouble for too? Like... Richard, Dylan Moore's in strife. This is with the shrugging. So it's not a good off-season to lose a Tom de Koning, for example, is it? Like if you don't have a leaper.
Or it's a great time to get one. So he's even more valuable. Yeah. Like he becomes a extremely valuable player now. Not that he wasn't already a valuable player, but even more so. Centre bounce is really important. Probably... I'm going to have to speak to champion data, but probably 3 goals on average come from centre bounce, I would imagine. So the advantage there. On the flip side of that, I think it really hurts Brodie Grundy. Like he just does not want to jump and doesn't want to be jumped into. So it's going to be an absolute nightmare for Sydney and Brodie Grundy in particular at centre bounce. Probably Tristan Sherry's going to lose his dominance. This is just at centre bounce. He's going to have it around the ground.
He posted yesterday, Tristan, I guess I'll jump if I have to. And Jeff White, thank F. They brought this rule back for centre bounces. It's meant to be an art, not a wrestle. Game on. And Jeff will join us later on. So who's it good for and who's it bad for, this suite of changes as well? So,
but don't you think this is just going to lead to more problems? Like the reason they've had to adjust the stand is because teams have exploited it. They've come off.
They've allowed it to be exploited.
The corridor. But it's hard. Like it's a hard game to umpire, and we make it so much harder by changing the rules all the time. And this is just pretty much a reaction to other rules that they've changed in the past.
Just as an aside, can I you know what the biggest load of garbage is on rule changes though? When you hear people say, more rule changes, no other code or sport changes rules like ours, blah, blah, blah. That is the biggest load of rot that you've ever heard. Don't let anyone ever say that in your company.
You think there are other codes that change the rules as much?
I don't think. I know there are.
Okay.
Of course there are. So I'll run through them. Soccer brought in VAR. FIFA's discussing changes to penalty rules now. No rebounds off the keeper. EPL changed a heap this year, the English Premier League. Captain-only approach to the ref. 8-second rule for keepers brought in. Drop ball restart adjustments. The NFL permanently introduced the dynamic kickoff this season. That's a massive change, the dynamic kickoff rule. Touchbacks are now at the 35-yard line. Overtime adjustments. Both teams need possessions. Onside kicks at any time while trailing, not just in the fourth quarter. The NBA's just brought in the heave rule. No end-of-quarter long shots affect a player's individual shooting percentage. There's a high-five rule for shooters on follow-through. It goes on. Cricket introduced a whole new format. They introduced T20. They've got a World Cup for it. And it's ruining Test cricket. I could go across every single sport. There's a suite of changes every year. So don't let anyone ever say that. The changes need to happen. The amendments need to happen. They need to be tightened. They need to be adjusted over time as the game changes with it, okay? Don't hate on change for change's sake. Sometimes it's necessary. But with our game being so complex and so unique, I'm with you. If you make a change, there is a risk. And the AFL are mindful of this, that you then therefore open up Pandora's box and a change necessitates another change. And there's a flow-on effect for the changes that you do make.
Are you upset by the last possession out of bounds between the arcs?
I'm not upset, no. Well, we knew this was coming, didn't we? It's been a long time coming and it was ratified on Monday. The data used by the AFL, they've said in the 2025 season, the AFL's findings discovered there were 20 boundary throw-ins paid between the arcs and 0.5 insufficient intent free kicks paid between the arcs per game. They then adapted those numbers for a scenario where the last disposal rule had been introduced, and the adapted numbers showed boundary throw-ins would be reduced by 3. So only 3 less boundary throw-ins a game, according to their data at the AFL. So for those saying it's the death of the ruckman, there still would have been 67 stoppages per game on average this season, based on the adapted numbers. So I don't see that being the death of the ruckman. It probably just clears out a grey area, for anything.
This rule works, and now we just don't have any confusion around, is the umpire going to pay insufficient intent? They've pretty much been adjudicating it as last possession out of bounds. It got stricter and stricter as the years have gone on. So less confusion. I tell you who the rule changes do favour, and that's those that can kick. If they're really going to crack down on stand and a player in that just cannot move, like the ridiculous rule that it is, players like Dane Zorko and Nasai Wanganeen-Miller are the ability just to go and wheel on and take the game on when that player cannot move. And also, last possession out of bounds, grab the ball straight away. You know it's your free kick. You don't have to wait for the umpire's decision. Bang, we're back in play. Ping it off with your ball movement. So the good kicks in the game are going to become even more valuable with this crackdown on stand and also crackdown on insufficient intent. So if you've got good kicks, you're in a good spot. If you don't, you're in a bit of trouble. And that's always been the case, but the rules are lending themselves to favour those who can really kick the footy.
Kirk, geez, you talk rubbish, Sam. Other sports might change a rule or so, but not 4 or 5 changes every bloody year. Sheesh. Kirk, do your research. Those changes I just read out were for this coming season in the English Premier League and in the NFL. They do. We just choose to jump on our soapbox here and pretend it doesn't happen in other sports. They've got the exact same scenarios we are facing. Don't worry about that. Juicer on the Limestone Coast. Hello, Juicer.
G'day, lads. How are we this morning?
We're good.
Good.
Sam, look, I think, mate, when we're reading this, as far as I'm invested in the AFL as an AFL member, I'm not invested in the Soccer League, EPL. I'm not a member of the NBA. We're paying our hard-earned for our opinion, and we keep on changing these rules constantly. I'm with Kane on this. We're going to have another rule change next year for the rule changes we've put in front of us now.
But so what would you say, Juicer, that we should still have the rules set in place from 1890 when Old Scotch played?
No, but we didn't need the drastic 6, 6 and 6 starting positions. We didn't need it. It's done nothing
Kane,
for
that
the
is
game, for scoring.
That has helped the game.
It hasn't helped. It may make the last minute when you're chasing.
So you like to see with 30 seconds to go a team put 16 players in its back half and clog the game up there?
I like
that
the ability for coaches to coach. Yes, I do.
There's plenty of other time and opportunity to coach.
Zero impact on scoring.
If we're beholding to the senior coaches, then we're stuffed.
It's got no impact on scoring. I don't like to see my team play with 17 players when there's 18 on the field and you have one guy standing there like a statue and some umpire screaming stand 50 times a game.
Okay.
Yeah,
well, you're blurring a couple of things.
If I don't like that.
So 666, if that's not there, then DeGoey doesn't happen in the grand final, one of the great moments, replayed it. Nazaya, Wanganeen-Miller, the greatest individual, never happened. They don't happen.
Now that you'd have Eddie Betts streaming off the back of the square, getting a handball received through the middle of the ground and kicking
You're robbing the game. Don't clog up the back 50.
You're having other aspects where coaches can actually coach, particularly when it has no impact on scoring.
Yep,
no impact on scoring. You like the fact that umpires stand there and scream stand, and we force players to sit there and cannot move.
Well, you're blurring rules now. But
there's two that I don't like.
That's why I go to the game, to see what Alistair Clarkson does with his magnet water. Is he going to put 15 back or 14 back? Oh, that's why I go to the game.
Well, you should, because if you've got a good coach, you're at an advantage.
That's so
you
exciting.
Sit in the coach's box, and then we have stopping play to warn that 6, 6 and 6. We haven't had people starting in the right positions. Ridiculous.
Yeah,
rule
the
change.
warning should go. The warning should go.
Game.
The warning should go. But in principle, 666 has delivered some of the highlights of the season year upon year.
But you would have got other highlights. You're always going to get highlights, and we always had highlights prior to people being forced to start in a position, and you handcuff coaches, and they're not allowed to do anything. So it's just done. It's done nothing.
Game-winning goals, I don't know. They're probably the epitome of the highlight.
You always had game-winning goals. What you're telling me, we didn't have game-winning goals before 6.
Let's not reduce them by clogging up.
Tony Lockett didn't kick a winning point in a prelim final.
Well,
prior to 6, 6 and 6.
He didn't have 16 players in front of him, Plugger. Imagine if he did. We might not even have the plugger that we remember because there'd be 15 plonkers
We
in front of him.
still had highlights.
You're
before
kidding yourself. Let's get
So
to
we never had game-winning goals before 6 and 6. That's only happened game-winning goals after 6, 6 and 6. We never had them before.
Now you're being silly.